Good morning, crime community. I'm here to continue to read out Edgar Allan Poe. This verse is called The Purpose of Poetry, Letter to B. It has been said that a good critique on a poem may be written by one who is no poet himself. This, according to your idea of mind of poetry, I feel to be false. The less poetical the critic, the less just the critique, and the converse. On this account, and because there are but few bees in the world, I would be much ashamed of the world's good opinion as proud of your own. Another than yourself might here observe, Shakespeare is in possession of the world's good opinion, and yet Shakespeare is the greatest of poets. There's a little off note. Printed with the following note in the second volume of the Southern Literary Messenger, this detached passage forms of the preface to a small volume printed some years ago for private circulation. We have vigor and much originality, but of course we shall not be called upon to endorse all the writer's opinions. So anyway, another than yourself might here observe, Shakespeare is in possession of the world's good opinion, and yet Shakespeare is the greatest of poets. It appears then, these pages are old. It appears then that the world judge correctly. Why should you be ashamed of your favorite judgment? The difficulty lies in the interpretation of the word judgment or opinion. The opinion of the world's truly may be called theirs as a man would call a book his having bought it. He did not write the book, but it is his, and he did not originate the opinion, but it is theirs. A fool, for example, thinks Shakespeare a great poet, yet the fool has never read Shakespeare. But the fool's neighbor, who is a step higher on the Andes of the mind, whose head, that is to say, has more exalted thought, is too far above the fool to be seen or understood, but whose feet, by which mean his everyday actions, are sufficiently near to be discerned, and by means of which their superiority as ascertained, which but for them would never have been discovered, this neighbor asserts that Shakespeare is a great poet. The fool believes him, and it is henceforth his opinion. The neighbor's own opinion has, in like manner, been adopted from one above him, and so accordingly to the few gifted individuals who knee around the summit, beholding face to face the master spirit who stands upon the pinnacle. You are aware of the great barrier in the path of the American writer. He is read, it is all in preference to the combined and established wit of the world. I say established, for it is with literature as with law of empire, an established name or an estate in tenure or a throne in possession. Besides, one might suppose that books like theirs, authors improved by travels, their having crossed the sea is, with us, so great a distinction, and antiquaries abandon time for distance. Our very fops glance from the binding to the bottom of the title page, where the mystic characters, which spell London, Paris, and Genoa, are precisely so many letters of recommendation. I mentioned just now a vulgar error as regards to criticism. I think the notion that no poet can form a correct estimate of his own writings is another. I remarked before that in proportion to the poetical talent would be the justice of the critique upon poetry. Therefore, a bad poet would, I grant, make a false critique, and his self-love would infallibly bias his little judgment in his favor. But a poet who is indeed a poet could not, I think, fail in making a critical critique. Whatever should be deduced in the force of self-love might be replaced on account of his intimate acquaintance with the subject. In short, we have more instances of false criticism than of just, where one's own writings are the test, simply because we have more bad poets than good. There are, of course, many objections to what I say. Milton is a great example of the contrary, but in his opinion, with respect to the Paradise Regained, is by no means fairly ascertained. By what trivial circumstances men are often led to assert that they do not really believe. Perhaps an inadvertent word had descended upon prosperity, but in fact the paradise regained is little, if at all, inferior to the paradise lost, and if only supposed so to because men do not like epics, whatever they may be, say to the contrary, and in reading those in Milton and their natural order, as too much wearied with the first to derive any pleasure from the second. I dare say Milton preferred Comus to either, if so justly, and I am speaking of poetry. It will not be amiss to touch slightly upon the most singular hearsay in its modern history, the hearsay of what is called very foolishly the Lake School. Some years ago, I might have been induced by some occasion like the present to attempt a formal refutation of their doctrine. At present, it would be a work of supererogation. The wise must blow to the wisdom of such men as Coleridge and Southby, but by wise being laughed at, poetical theories as prosaically exemplified, Aristotle, with singular assurance, has declared poetry the most philosophical of all writings, but it required a Wordsworth to pronounce it, and the most metaphysical. He seems to think that the end of the poetry is, or should be, instruction, and it is truism that at the end of the existence is happiness. If so, the end of the very separate part of existence, everything connected with our existence, should be still happiness. Therefore, the end of instruction should be happiness, and happiness is the name for pleasure. Therefore, the end of instruction should be pleasure. Yet we see the above-mentioned opinions apply precisely the reverse. To proceed, cerebus paribus, he who pleases this is more important to his fellow man than he who pleases instructs, since utility is happiness and pleasure is the end already obtained, with instruction is merely the obtaining, the meaning of obtaining. I see no reason, then, why our metaphysical poets should plume themselves as much as the utility of their works, unless indeed they refer to instruction with eternity in view, in which case sincere respect to their piety would not allow me to express my contempt for their judgment, contempt which would be difficult to conceal, since their writings are professedly to be understood by the few, and it is the many who need to stand in need of salvation. In such case, I should no doubt be tempted to think of the devil in Melmoth, who labors indefatigably through 3 octavo volumes to accomplish the destruction of 1 or 2 souls, while in any common devil would have demolished 1 or 2,000. Against the subtleties which would make poetry a study, not a passion, it becomes a metaphysician to reason, with the poet to protest. Yet Wordsworth and Coleridge are men in years, and one indeed is contemplation from his childhood, the other a giant in intellect and learning. The defiance, then, with which I tenure to dispute their authority would be overwhelming, did I not feel from the bottom of my heart that learning has little to do with the imagination, intellect with the passions, or age with poetry. Trifles like straws upon the surface below. He who would search for pearls must dive below. All lines which are done much mischief. As regards with greater truths, men often err by making them at the bottom than at the top. The top lies in the huge abysses where wisdom is sought, not in the palpable palaces where she is found. The ancients were not always right in hiding the goddesses in a well. Witness the light which Bacon had thrown upon the philosophy. Witness the principles of our divine faith, the moral mechanisms by which the simplicity of a child may overbalance the wisdom of a man. We see an instance of Coleridge's liability to error in his Bibliographia Literaria, professedly his literary life and opinion, but in fact the Tristis de Homini Cebrisi e Equalista Malis. We go wrong by reason of his very profundity and his error. We have a natural type in the contemplation of a star. He who regards it directly and intensely sees in its truth the star. It is the star without a ray, while he who surveys it less inquisitively, unconscious of all for which the star is useful to us below, its brilliancy and its beauty. As to Wordsworth, we have no faith in him, that he had in youth the feeling of a poet, I believe, for these are the glimpses of extreme delicacy in his writings, and delicacy in the poet's own kingdom is El Dorado, but they have the appearance of a better day recollected. The glimpses at best have little evidence at present. Poetic fire, we know that the few straggling flowers spring up daily in the crevices of the glacier. He was to blame in worrying away his youth in contemplation about the end of poetizing in his manhood. With the increase of his judgment, the light which should be it apparent had faded away. This judgment consequently is too correct. They may not be understood, but the old Goths of Germany would have understood it, who used to debate matters of importance to their state twice, once when drunk and once when sober, sober when they might be deficient or formality, drunk lest they should be destitute of vigor. The long wordsy discussion by which he tries to reason us into admiration of his poetry speaks very little in his favor and are full of such assertions as this. I have opened one of his volumes at random. Of genius, the only proof of the act of doing well, what is worthy to be done and what has never done before. Indeed, when it follows that in doing what is unworthy to be done or what has to be done before, no genius can be evinced. Yet the picking of pockets is an unworthy act. Pockets have been picked time immemorial. And Barrington, the pickpocket, in point of genius, would have thought hard for a comparison with William Wordsworth, the poet. Again, in estimating the merit of certain poems, whether they be Ossidian's or Macpherson's, can surely be of little consequence. Yet in order to prove their worthlessness, Mr. W. has expended many pages in the controversy. Can great minds descend to such absurdity? But worse still, that he may bear down on every argument in favor of these poems, he triumphantly drags forward a passage in his abomination of which he expects the reader to sympathize. It is in the beginning of the epic poem, Temora. The blue waves of Ullin roll in light, the green hills are covered with day, trees shake their dusky heads in the breeze. And this gorgeous yet simple imaginary, where all is alive and painting with immortality, this William Wordsworth, the author of Peter Bell, is selecting for his contempt. We shall see what better he in his own person has to offer in premise. And now she's at the pony's head, and now she's at the pony's tail, and now and side now, and now on this, and almost stiffed her with bliss. A few sad tears does Betty shed, and pats the pony where and when she knows not, happy Betty Foy. Oh, Johnny, never mind the doctor. Secondly, the dew was falling fast, the stars began to blink. I heard a voice that said, drink, pretty creatures, drink. And looking o'er the hedge is before me I espied a snow-white mountain lamb with a maiden at its side. No other sheep was near, the lamb was all alone, and by the slender cord was tethered to a stone. Now we have no doubt this is all true. We will believe it. Indeed, we will, Mr. W. It is sympathy for the sheep you wish to excite. I love a sheep from the bottom of my heart. But there are other occasions, Mr. B. There are other occasions when even Wordsworth is reasonable. Even Stambole, as it is said, shall have an end, and the most unlikely blunders must come to a conclusion. Here is an extract from his preface. Those who have been accustomed to the phraseology of modern writers as they persist in reading this book to a conclusion will no doubt have to struggle with the feelings of awkwardness. They will look round the poetry and will be induced to inquire by what species of controversy these attempts have been permitted to assume the title. Yet let not Mr. W. despair. He has given immortality to a wagon and the bee. Sophocles has transmitted in eternity a sore toe, a dignified, a tragedy with the chorus of turkeys. Of Coleridge I cannot speak, but with reverence, a towering intellect, his gigantic power. He is once more evidence of the fact he has imprisoned his own conceptions by the barrier he has erected against those of others. He is lamentable to think that such a mind could be buried in the metaphysics and like the Nepenthes waits its perfume upon the night alone. In reading his poetry, I tremble, one who stands upon a volcano, conscious from the very darkness bursting from the crater, of the fire and the light that are weltering below. What is poetry? Poetry, that protesis-like idea, as with as many appellations in the 9 titled Choresia. Give me, I demanded of a scholar some time ago, give me a definition of poetry. Tres volontaires, as he proceeded to his library, brought me a Mr. Johnson and overwhelmed me with a definition, shade of the immortal Shakespeare. I imagined to myself the scowl of your spiritual eye upon the profanity of that scurrilous Ursa Major. Think of poetry, Mr. B. Think of poetry, and then think of Dr. Samuel Johnson. Think of all that is airy and fairy-like, and then of all that is hideous and unwieldy. Think of all the huge bulk, the elephant, and then think of Tempest, the Midsummer Night's Dream, Prospero, Oberon, Titania. A poem, in my opinion, is opposed to a work of science by having for its immediate object pleasure, not truth, to romance by having for its object an indefinite instead of a definite pleasure, being a poem only so far as this object is attained, romance presenting perceptible images which define poetry and indefinite sensations, to which end music is an essential, since the comprehension of sweet sound is our most indefinable conception. Music, then, combined without a pleasurable idea is poetry. Music without the idea is simply music. The idea without the music is prose from its very definitiveness. What was meant by the invective against him who had no music in his soul? To sum up the long rigmarole, I have, Mr. D, what you have no doubt perceived for the metaphysical poets. As poets, the most sovereign contempt that they have followers proves nothing. No Indian prince has to his palace more followers than a thief to the gallows. That's the end of the purpose of poetry, which will lead us to the principle of poetry. What principles are involved in poetry? Did we learn anything today about the purpose of poetry? Maybe you watch it again and learn some more. God bless the children, God bless the world, and God bless America, and have a good day.